So our today's topic is going to be the one related to the oxygen debt, because when we need to when we need to when we needed to breathe with a very high rate, we have consumed all of it. Now we need to return it. We need to return the debt. So for that purpose, what do we need to do? We post exercise heavy breathing. We practice a particular, you can say, a particular habit, and that is post exercise heavy breathing. And why do we do it? Basically, we do this phenomena to recover oxygen, so that we can return the debt to the blood. So we try breathing very heavily. If you notice, next time when you play, you should notice that when we are done with our exercise, we start breathing heavily after that. When we sit and relax, we start breathing heavily after that, not during the exercise. During the exercise, most of the time we don't breathe that much heavily. But once you sit, you start breathing really heavily. And the reason is that this is the habit of the body, that when the body is done with doing a lot of heavy exercise, then after that it would try to return the oxygen debt, and it starts heavy breathing. That is the time when we do it. So this is why it is called as post exercise heavy breathing, or you can say post exercise oxygen consumption. That is also called as post exercise oxygen consumption. Now see, one purpose of heavy breathing is to recover oxygen. This is one purpose. There is another purpose of heavy breathing. And what is that? The another purpose of heavy breathing is to um, another purpose of heavy breathing is to basically convert the lactic acid convert the lactic acid into glucose, or maybe into um, into intermediates of respiration into intermediates of respiration to perform the complete process. See, what I told you last time, I told you that when we do the respiration, one thing is clear. If we have enough oxygen, then the respiration would be continued to mitochondria. Respiration would be continued to mitochondria. But if the respiration is not continued, if the respiration is not continued, or if the oxygen is lacking, then aerobic respiration would not be continued, and the phenomena would return to would turn to anaerobic respiration. If you want to, then I can draw it again. Glucose, then enough oxygen is available. The phenomena, the respiration enters the mitochondria. But if there is a lack of oxygen, if there is a lack of oxygen, then the phenomena would turn to anaerobic respiration. Now, at the end of anaerobic respiration, we said that lactic acid would be formed. Lactic acid. Now we can do two things to lactic acid. One, take the lactic acid. No, be very attentive. take this lactic acid, add it into the bloodstream, add it into the bloodstream, return it to the liver, and liver would convert the to lactic acid to back to glucose. This is one way. This is one way that after exercise you are going to add the lactic acid into the bloodstream. The bloodstream would take the lactic acid to the liver. Liver, in the presence of oxygen, would convert the lactic acid back to glucose. One way of utilizing the lactic acid. Second is, if when you have enough oxygen, when you have enough oxygen now, you return the lactic acid back to mitochondria and the process of respiration continues. This is another way of doing it. So it means that when we are doing a heavy exercise, after that we do heavy breathing, and the purpose of heavy breathing is to just um, convert the lactic acid into the glucose in the liver, or maybe take the lactic acid, uh, enter the lactic acid into the mitochondria, and then restart the process or complete the process of respiration. Both of these things are in our favor. None of them is bad. Both of these would happen like in our favor. So that is why we say that the post exercise oxygen consumption occurs, and we need a lot of oxygen to do that. If you focus, both of these procedures require oxygen. This process is requiring oxygen as well as this process, because it is rest of the process of respiration and it is going to require oxygen. So that is why we breathe heavily, because we are going to do two of the heavy processes, and these processes can occur simultaneously. Like maybe the respiration is occurring in your muscles while the lactic acid is being converted to glucose in your liver. That is what we often, you can say, do. These can go parallel. Is it understood?
Yes, understood.
We are going to start the next chapter. You want to have a look at it?
No, it's fine.
It's fine. Okay, let's start the next chapter. Okay, the next chapter is the coordination and control. Now, apparently, this chapter is a bit heavier. This chapter is a bit heavier. Why is it a heavy chapter? The thing is that in this chapter, we understand the simultaneous working or equilibrium based working or harmonious working of many of our systems. It is basically called as coordinated working. Okay, if I simply ask you, how would you say that? What is coordination? What is coordination? How would you say that?
Um, Working together simultaneously.
Working working together simultaneously is coordination. I would add one more thing into it. When you are working together to achieve the same goal, that is called as the coordination. It simplifies our concept. Okay, so the coordination basically is working together, one thing that you told. And the second thing about the coordination is that it helps us um, achieve the same goal. Achieve the same goal. So now try to apply it on the body. when the body's organs, uh, at least two organs, at least two organs, they work simultaneously to achieve the same goal. Same goal. That is called as biological coordination. This process is so important. This process is so much important that actually your body would be, you can simply say that we are alive because of it. We are alive because of it. Simply saying. Because this process occurs in all organisms. All organisms. So we are basically alive due to this particular procedure, due to this particular method, due to this particular activity. So that is the importance of this thing. The next question is how. How do we coordinate? So in a general phenomena of coordination, you may understand that there is a team. Always in a coordination, there is a team. And every team has a leader, leader or team head. And the others are like workers, or you can say teammates, making the goal. They are making the goal easier, like making to achieve the goal easier. So everywhere there is a team leader, and the team leader tells other people, other workers, that what should everyone do, and which is basically one of the, you can say, uh, one of the least demand of a coordination phenomena, that if you want to do some work, if you want to achieve a goal, you need to have a lot of particularity in the distribution of work. So that is why the team leader is real important. Now in our body, when we try to apply the same theme on our body, the leader in our body, the leader in our body is actually the coordinator, and the coordinator is an organ that we often name as brain. Why do we call it a brain? Why do we call it a why do we say that brain is the coordinator and none of the other parts of the body are qualified as the coordinator?
Because the brain controls all the actions the body does.
Actually, you can say that one ability of the brain that none of the other organs can have. It can differentiate between different stimuli. Differentiate between different stimuli. Suppose if I say that what organ actually controls the amount of sugar in our body, can you tell me? What is the organ that controls the amount of sugar in our body? You don't
The
know?
pancreas,
The pancreas. The pancreas is the main organ. But remember that pancreas is only able to do this. What? It can control the amount of sugar. None of the else, nothing else. Brain is one of those organs which can differentiate between different stimuli, and it can decide. That is why we call it a coordinator or team leader. Now, the brain This word you will understand, stimuli. I'll explain this word a bit later. Every team leader needs input. Leader needs input. Now that input has to be brought to the leader. So any change, which in scientific word is called as a stimulus. Any change occurring in the body is called occurring inside or outside the body is called a stimulus. So the input of any change has to be brought to the coordinator. Suppose something is happening outside the body. First, you have to sense it. Anything that is occurring inside the body or outside the body, that is called as that has to be sensed. Always remember that if you cannot sense something, it is not a stimulus for you. Suppose if there is a person who is blind, what changes are occurring inside the light? What changings are occurring in the light? What changing are occurring in the intensity of light? Most of those changes would be missed by a blind person. We know that. Why? Because he cannot sense the light. So
Yeah,
anything that you cannot sense is not a stimulus for you. Why we are not able to sense the things, sense or smell the things more than the dogs? Because we don't have those senses. The senses, in other words, are called as receptors. They are called as receptors. Then once you have sensed some problem, now you cannot do nothing on your own. You cannot do nothing on your own. Tell you have to tell the coordinator that what should we do. But right now, your only duty, now try to understand, your supervisor has told you, your team leader has told you, you must not do anything. You must not do anything. If you sense something, just come and tell me. You might have seen this in the movies, and you might have also heard it that in the movies, sometime when they ask their junior to bring the intel to them, bring the information to them, what they say, you must not do anything, do not engage the enemy, or do not engage it until you have told me. So this is like some kind of planning, you can say. So basically, it resembles it a lot. The senses of the body don't have to do anything, they just have to bring the intel to the coordinator. They just have to bring the information to the coordinator. Now, once they have brought the intel to the coordinator would process it. The coordinator would process it. It can store it. It can respond it. That is the issue of the coordinator. The receptors don't have to do anything. If the coordinator does not respond to it, that is not an issue of the receptors or senses. Now, after the coordinator, it goes to uh, the organs which are going to show response. These organs are called as effectors. They are going to make some effect. They are going to change something. They are going to act upon it. Then the last thing that is shown is called as the response. So always remember that we need to understand that whenever the body is going to sense some stimulus, some parts of the body are dedicated to take the message toward the coordinator, and the other parts of the body are dedicated to respond to it. But would we respond or not, that would be decided by the coordinator. Understood?
Yes, understood.
Suppose that there is a stimulus, and that stimulus is that your glucose is high. Glucose is high. Now the glucose, this stimulus would be received by the receptors. These receptors would inform the brain that this is not good, the glucose level is a bit too high. Or no, hold on, let me take an example from the previous chapter so we can understand it properly. Suppose that the stimulus is amount of carbon dioxide, high amount of carbon dioxide in the blood. These There are receptors present in the aorta. In the aorta, the receptors are present which can sense the amount of carbon dioxide. They'll tell the brain. The brain's breathing system is located very close to the heart. It is present at just the beginning of the spinal cord, which means just below your head. So now the brain would decide it's time to take action. It would send the signals to the effectors. In this case, what are the effectors? Effectors are your muscles. Effectors are your muscles. And what would you do? How would you respond? Can you tell me how would you respond with the help of muscles?
So they would move.
No. You'll increase the contraction rate of breathing muscles. If you remember, rate of breathing muscles. So when your muscles would contract and relax, you will breathe higher. You'll breathe with a high rate. That is why you need to you need to tell your brain what's happening, because sometimes you don't need to respond. Like when you don't need to respond, see, someone says unpleasant, someone gives unpleasant remarks about you, unpleasant remarks. Your ears sense them. Your ears told your brain, and brain just memorized and stored, not responded. That is the only organ qualified enough to be called as the coordinator. Why? It can decide what you should do. Should you respond to it in a very bad manner? Should you just leave it, not replying it? Should you just leave that gathering where some unpleasant remarks were presented about you? No. Anything would be like could happen based on the decision of your brain. That is why the only organ that is qualified enough to be called as a coordinator is the brain. Some people might include the spinal coordinate. There is a very small reason behind it, so I'll tell you about that later. Right now it's the brain. Okay. Anything to that is bothering you?
No, it's all clear.
Okay. Now, the important thing is, what is the way of communication? Way of communication. Like obviously, we are constantly saying that the signals would be sent to the brain. The brain would be sending the signals toward the effector, and the senses or receptors would be sending the signals towards the brain. But what is the way of communication between the receptor and brain, and between the brain and effectors? Now, to understand this, we need to talk about a particular system of our body called as nervous system. Nervous system, it includes nerves. It includes nerves. What are nerves? Nerves are basically bundles of neurons. These are bundles of neurons. These are just like a collection of wires, collection of small pieces of wires, small pieces of wires. So those are called as bundles of neurons, nerves. Have you ever opened a thick wire?
Yeah, there's no wires inside.
There are more wires inside it. Similar look is for the nerves. The nerves are basically the nerves are basically those particular wires containing more wires inside it. Okay. Now, uh, the nerves can control. If I get back to the nerves, nerves can control the the communication because there are their structure their structure is ideal to a wave of run a wave of electrochemical changes. Electrochemical changes. Let me repeat. Nerves can control the communication because their structure is ideal to run a wave of electrochemical changes. The wave of electrochemical changes, in other words, is called as, I'm sorry, nerve impulse. It is basically wave of electrochemical changes. Just like the wires are ideal for the flow of electrons, wires are ideal for the flow of electrons. Similarly, the neurons or nerves are ideal for to bring about a wave of electrochemical changes, which in other words is called as the nerve impulse. That is why the nerves are ideal thing. The nerves are most important thing that can that can carry the communication. Now it definitely means that basically from the receptor to the brain, the nerves are involved. The nerves are taking the signals towards the brain. And from brain to the effector, definitely the nerves are also involved. But the thing is, we have lots and lots of nerves and neurons. Lots and lots of nerves and neurons. Now, how can we differentiate them? How can we differentiate between those nerves which are taking the impulse towards the brain? Listen to me carefully. How can we differentiate between those nerves which are taking the impulse towards the brain and those which are taking the impulse away from the brain? Let me repeat my sentence. How can we differentiate between the nerves which are taking the impulse towards the brain and the nerves which are taking the impulse away from the brain? How can we differentiate them? We have particular criteria. But before telling you that criteria, we have different names for it. Those which are taking the impulses from your senses to the brain are called as sensory neurons or sensory nerves. Sensory neurons or sensory nerves. while those which are taking the impulse away from your brain toward the effector are called as motor neurons or motor nerves. Motor. A motor is something that pushes something away from it. So motor neurons are those which are taking the impulse away from the brain. So this is why it is just like when you travel, you go towards a city. If your reference point is that city, then you have two roads. One road is taking you towards that city, and one road is taking you away from that city, isn't it?
Yes.
So you might not have names for like for each one of those nerves, but yes, you are. This is very simple to know that one is taking you towards and one is taking you away from it. All right. Now let's see. We said that the nerves are bundles of neurons. Now, what is a neuron? Okay. Always remember that nerves, in simple words, are tissues and neurons are cells. Neurons are cells. Okay, before telling you about the neurons, I would like you to tell you a bit more about the nerves. The nerves are of three types of nerves. One type of nerve is a sensory nerve. How would you define it? All neurons of sensory nerves, sensory nerve, take the message towards the brain, towards the brain. Like it only has those neurons which is taking the taking the message toward the brain or taking the impulse. Now that we know the title, or now that we know the term impulse, so we can change the message to impulse. So only those neurons which are taking the impulse towards brain, if all of the neurons are bundled, if all of these kinds of neurons are bundled together, that is called as sensory nerve, because it is taking the impulse towards the brain only. Second type of nerve is the motor nerve. Now, how would you define it?
Not sure. Like the
Try
one
taking. Mhm.
for movements.
Okay. Try taking the help from the above definition.
The nerves responsible for all skeletal
They are
movements.
no motor nerves are those nerves which are uh, containing all neurons that take the impulse, take the impulse away from the brain, the brain. Wherever they are leading it, it's not our problem. Defining it, while defining it, you would not say where the impulse is being taken. No, 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 no. You would say, you would just tell the impulse is being taken away from the neuron. Impulse is being taken away from the brain, sorry, away from the brain. You would not tell wherever where they are going. That's not your issue. The issue is if it is away from the brain, that would be the motor neuron and motor nerves. So suppose you have lots of wires and you bundle them, and that wire is responsible for taking the current away from a circuit. You would say that that's a motor wire. Why? Because it's taking away from your reference point. Similarly, if you have lots of wires bundled together and that bundle is taking the impulse towards a circuit, you would call it, in this language, you would call it sensory nerve. Similarly, a nerve is a thick wire consisting of many small wires, and those small wires are neurons. If all those small neurons are taking the impulse towards the brain, that would be sensory nerve. And if they are taking the impulse away from the brain, that would be called as the motor nerve. So the simple thing is the direction of the impulse. If all of them are taking towards the brain, sensory. If all of them are taking away from the brain, motor neurons or motor nerves. Is it clear?
Yes, it's clear.
The third type of a nerve is called as mixed nerve. Mixed nerve is the one in which uh, half neurons are sensory and half are motor. Now, try to think about it, try to process it. How would you clear it out? How would you clear this concept?
What do you mean clear this concept?
Like, simplify it. Why are we calling this nerve as a mixed nerve?
Because they're a mix of both sensory and motor.
Yes, it's a mix of both, or in more simple words, you can say that it is taking the impulse in both directions. Because we only have two possibilities. One is towards brain, one is away from brain. If one nerve is doing both, we'll say it is a mixed nerve. Next. Next thing is, okay, we are saying nerves are bundles of neurons. So what are the neurons? Neurons are the cells, and they are very unique cells. In what sense? They're very unique cells because they have a small cell body but very elongated cell membranes. Elongated or extended cell membranes. Extended cell membranes helping the neuron, helping the neurons to conduct a nerve impulse. A nerve impulse. Focus now. This is how a neuron looks like. And you can clearly see that it has some weird extensions. It contains some weird extensions which are not unique, which are not like very common, very, you can say, very similar to any other of the body cells. So what is all this? This basically is um, a neuron in which you will say the thickest part that you look at is this one. This is your cell body, and obviously this is cytoplasm. And also remember that cytoplasm is not limited to this part of the swollen part. The swollen part is the cell body. The cytoplasm can be found here as well, like in this smaller space between these two lines. In this smaller space you will also find the cytoplasm. Okay, next, uh, there are extensions. There are extensions. Uh, Extensions of the cell membranes have their names according to the function. One type of extensions, these extensions, they receive the impulse. They receive the impulse. So these are called as dendrites. And always remember, a dendrite would always appear a bit tree-like, because dendrite literally means tree. So these extensions that you are looking at, they are receiving the impulse. Maybe you are. This is a receptor. This is a receptor. One more thing. Always remember, receptor is something different from a neuron. Something different from neuron. What is the meaning of it? Try to focus here. A receptor is meant to receive the signal. Neuron, it gives the signal to the neurons. So basically it means that, suppose this is the cell body of a neuron. This is the cell body, and from here
Your voice is gone.
okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, for how long I was you were not listening to me? What was
You finished on 1 second. Yeah, nothing was skipped.
okay. All right. So like I was here.
You were
Just
just
hold
about
on.
to
Let
finish
me
drawing that diagram.
the neuron.
No, 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 the one on the next page.
Okay. So basically, my question, which I was mentioning in the like last seconds, that basically you would never say that the switchboard and the wire are same things. You would say the switchboard is a source of impulse transfer. It's a source of impulse transfer. Just like that, the receptors are just like a switchboard. You make changes to it, the receptor would hand over the changes to the neuron. It would hand over the changes to the neuron with the help of the dendrites. So always remember, it is the dendrites that are responsible to receive the impulse. Is that clear?
Yes, it's clear.
Next, now there is another thing. You need another thin extension to take the impulse away from the cell body. This is the cell body, as I have already told you, this one. You have received the impulse. The impulse is now being received, and it is closer to the cell body, very close to the cell body. Now, the cell body cannot keep it to itself. It has to move it on. It has to transfer it. Now, how would it do it? It would give it to the another extension, and that extension is called as axon. That extension is called as axon, and it would take the impulse away from the brain, away from the cell body. That is an axon. So in this sense, you will say that once you make the changes to the receptor would hand over the impulses to the dendrites. The dendrite would give it to the cell body. The cell body would give it to the axon, and axon is taking it towards away from the cell body. Wherever it is taking, that is something else. So this is how you would say that the neurons would work. About the dendrite and axon, I would like you to know very important thing. The dendrite is meant to receive the impulse. The impulse. The axon is meant to take away the impulse. Take the impulse away. But there is one more thing that might disturb you a bit. The dendrite only look like a tree. Look like a tree. Which means if it is not like if it does not look like a tree, if it doesn't, it's an axon. It's an axon. While axon look like a wire, look like a single wire. I would just say fiber, a single fiber. So in this way, I have another concept for you. Suppose that these are the dendrites, then this is the cell body, and again, now these are the dendrites, no doubt. But what would you call this single fiber? You would call this single fiber as axon. You would not call these as dendrites. Why? The structure. Both of these are axons. So the dendrites have to be looking like a tree. Is it clear?
Yep, understand.
Okay. Now let's see. The neurons also have different types. Types of neurons. Types of neurons. See, there are many neurons specialized to take an impulse towards brain, towards brain. See, this is very something strange. That basically the nerves are because of neurons. If the neuron is taking the impulse towards brain, then it would definitely be called as a sensory neuron, just like a sensory nerve, because nerves are because of the neurons. That is why these sensory neurons are named based on their function. Neuron is a single thing, the nerve is a bundle, but the principle is not changing. The principle is either they are taking the impulse away from the brain or they are taking the impulse towards brain. So if it is taking an impulse towards brain, it would be called as a sensory neuron. And if it is specialized to take an impulse away from the brain, it is called as a motor neuron. Clear?
Yep.
Also, one more thing, you need to realize it. Uh, Hold on, just hold on. Hmm. Okay, you need to realize it that the sensory and motor look totally different from each other. Sensory neurons are always those which are associated to a receptor. Why? Because they are associated to a receptor. I'm writing R over here. This is the dendrite. Their cell body looks like this, and this is their cell body, and these are the axons of the sensory neuron. This is a sensory neuron. Then comes a motor neuron. A motor neuron looks like this. This is a motor neuron. You can clearly see that the cell body of a motor neuron is terminal. The cell body, the first difference is of cell body. Cell body is on the side. For the sensory, it's on the side. While for motor, it's terminal. It contains two axons. It only contains one axon. And then its cell body is very small. The sensory neuron cell body is very small, while its cell body is large. Then talking about the dendrites. The dendrites of the sensory neuron are less, while they have very thick uh, cluster of dendrites, although it looks a bit other way around. Then the direction, obviously direction of impulse is different. Direction towards brain and away from brain. Okay, everything clear?
Yes, clear.
Next terminology is the question is what takes the impulse takes the impulse from sensory nerve and give it to motor nerve. Very big question. Very important question. What takes the impulse from the neuron, sensory nerve, and give it to the motor nerve? There has to be someone. Like we are saying, the brain is receiving from sensory neuron or nerve, and the brain is giving to the motor nerve. What is inside the brain? Remember that the neurons that are specialized to take an impulse, process it, store it, and give it to motor neuron are called as relay neuron or interneurons. Also these are called as relay neurons. They would take it, process it, and give it to the motor neuron. And those neurons look like this. They have they often don't have a very large cell body. They may look like this, but their dendrites are so many that sometimes we say that they don't even have an axon. They they have so many dendrites that sometimes we have to say that some of them don't even have axons. But it is a reality that on one side of the relay neuron you have motor, and on the other side of the relay neuron you have sensory. Like from here the sensory neuron is taking the impulse, and from here the motor neuron is taking the impulse. So basically the sensory would move toward it and the motor. Our brain, these basically are also called as central neurons. Why? Because they are mostly found only in brain and spinal cord. Brain and spinal cord.
Okay.
So this is why they are called as relay neurons. Okay, so now let's try studying about the function. Once we have talked about it, okay, one more thing I need to, yeah, there is a receptor. If there is a receptor, then it means always remember the impulse would always move away from the receptor. So if there is the receptor, the movement of impulse would be away from it. And if over here you see motor neuron, then its direction would be toward the effector. Suppose there are muscle, so the nerve impulse would be towards the effector. That is why we need to be very focused upon what we need to decide, how we need to decide the direction of impulse. It is very important. If the direction of impulse is wrongly decided, it would be very bad, very wrong. So it would be always away from the receptor, and keep a very close look at the size of the cell body, because the size of the cell body would also decide the direction of impulse, whether it should be towards brain or away from the brain. Because if the cell body is on the side, it would always be towards the brain because it is a sensory neuron. And if the cell body is terminal and larger, it means that it is always away from the brain because it is a motor neuron. So we can always decide by looking at the cell body. Got it?
Yeah, got it.
Okay. Synapse. Oops. Okay. Next thing is how the impulse moves. Hold on. Groups of nerves. Groups of nerves and neurons. This is important to know that neurons and nerves are divided into two different groups. One type of neurons and nerves are centrally present. So they would be called as central nervous system. And those nerves and neurons are supposed to be located inside brain and spinal cord. While the groups of nerves and neurons which are peripherally present means peripherally present means that they are present outside brain and spinal cord, outside the brain and spinal cord. So they would be called as peripheral nervous system. Nervous system. Example, let's talk about the example. Suppose that suppose that a person gets a stimulus on its feet. Now over here you have a pain receptor. You have a pain receptor, and obviously, as I said, that the receptors are always present very close to the sensory neurons. Why? Because they are just like switchboard and wire. So this is a receptor, and very close to it you will find the dendrites of the sensory neuron. The sensory neuron would take it all the way to the spinal cord. Now remember, this is an axon, and this is a single axon, not terminating anywhere from the source, right at the source of the stimulus, till the spinal cord. Till the spinal cord, it is not being broken. Very important information it is. That it is, it basically is the unbroken axon that is going to take the impulse right from the site of stimulus till the spinal cord. Now this is the spinal cord. Be very focused here. Okay, let me draw a simple diagram here. I don't have time. This is the spinal cord, and under the microscope looks like this. The spinal cord. Now remember, okay, hold on. Now remember that uh, this is, although it's a single axon, but in reality, it's a nerve. It's a whole nerve that is taking the impulse towards the spinal cord. Reaching very close to spinal cord, they would make their cell bodies and then enter into the spinal cord. Now, what kind of neuron it is? Obviously, it's a sensory neuron. Why am I so confirmed that it is a sensory neuron? Can you tell me?
Um, because it's in a place where there's no actual movement, like the part of the foot that it's in is not doesn't have a joint.
What are the other sources of identification? What are the other means that I told you to identify? How
That
would you identify it on the basis of the cell body?
it's on the skin.
What? That? Didn't I tell you that sensory neuron cell body is always on the side?
Yeah, but this doesn't look like it's on the side. It just looks like it's in the middle somewhere.
This is the neuron. This is the axon. It comes like this and then this. Comes in the center does not comes in the center does not mean that in the center of the center of it. It means that it looks very different from, it looks like a different structure from the axon. It looks like totally separating itself from the axon. So if you see closely, it is totally separating itself. It is not in the way of axon. If you try to simplify it, it basically is not in the way of axon. And another identification is it has two axons. One axon is this and another axon is this. Still did not understand?
Yeah, it makes sense now.
So basically it's a sensory neuron and I am saying it on the basis of the cell body. So the impulse would move from here, from the axon here, and it would move to the cell body. Then from the cell body, it would enter into the spinal cord. This axon is not like disconnected. It is continued right from your foot to the spinal cord. Now, what would happen from the spinal cord, we'll talk about this tomorrow, but I would request you to please revise it because I am sensing that I might not have conveyed the information properly, or you were not attentive. Your answers were not matching my questions. What was the problem here?